How is it that being a digital nomad helps us to have a good life? By the way, how can we have a good life even when we are not a digital nomad? So to answer that question, we first have to understand what exactly does it mean to have a good life. And sometimes it's kind of hard to answer directly what is it that makes a life good, but it's easier to understand what makes life bad. And I would say that what would make life really bad is to have a lot of suffering over our lives. If we can have less suffering, that means we have a better life than when we have more suffering. So in a sense, we can say that having a good life means having as little suffering during our lives as possible. We'll always have some level of suffering because this is part of being in this world. But if we can reduce the suffering to the bare minimum, that would mean we have a good life. It's not the only definition of a good life, but it's good enough for the purpose of this video. So having a good life means having as little suffering as possible. Alright, so what do we have to do to have in our lives as little suffering as possible? I would say that the quality of our lives and the amount of suffering that we have or not is very much connected with the quality of the decisions that we make during our lives. The fact is that for the most part, when we suffer, the reason why we suffer is because of our bad choices. It's not the only reason, but most of the time when we are suffering, it is generally because we made bad choices. So choosing well really helps us to have a good life. If that's the case, the question is, how is it that we can make better decisions? And that's the point of this video. How can we make better decisions so that we can, in the end of the day, have a good life? And more specifically, how being a digital nomad can help us to make better decisions. The reason why I'm talking about digital nomads is because my wife and I, we have been digital nomads for the last 14 years, so we are always moving around the world. In this moment, for instance, we are in a small town here in Albania, and most of the time we spend like 3 months in each place, and then we move on to another place. So this lifestyle, it gives us a lot of opportunities to actually learn to make better decisions. And to illustrate that, I will give you a very simple example. So every day we go to the gym. When we go to the gym, we do our exercise, and of course we also observe that other people are doing their exercise. And one of the things that we noticed here is that sometimes people will do the exercise, so they will set up an equipment. For instance, they will bring the weights and they will set up the whole equipment, and then they do the exercise, and then they just leave and go and do some other exercise instead of actually taking the weights and putting back where they found it originally. So the equipment now is set up, and if another person comes to use the equipment, they will actually have to take the weights off and do the work that the previous person should have done but didn't do it. So we noticed that this happened here with a certain regularity. We also noticed that in the past, when we used to live in Brazil, where we are from, we wouldn't see this that often. I mean, it would happen as well, but not that often. And because there is a difference, we begin to notice that there is something different here, and we begin to think about this. Why is this important? So, you see, the reason why we make bad choices in our lives has a lot to do with our ignorance. Ignorance in the sense of the things that we don't know yet. The things that, because we don't know, we can't make good decisions. So there are many situations in our lives we have to choose something, some path, but we really don't understand completely the situation because there are always way more things to know than we can possibly know. So our knowledge is always very limited, and it's exactly this limitation in our knowledge that makes us choose not so wisely and takes us to the wrong path. But the thing is, there is one problem connected with our lack of knowledge. So this is one problem. But there is another problem that is much worse, which is like this. There are some things that we believe that should be in a certain way, that we believe that work in a specific way, but that actually don't work that way. I mean, we are just wrong. Our preconception is wrong. But we really, really think that that is right. And because of this misconception, we very often take the wrong path. So this misconception is even worse than not really knowing anything about the subject. Because when we don't know anything about the subject, we realize that we should study and we should learn about it, and eventually we can make a decision. But when we are already sure that we know about the subject, we don't even care to look at other alternatives. We just think that we know what to do when in fact we don't. And so one of the things that we need to do in order to make our decisions better is to question ourselves and to question and to think, oh, maybe this is a misconception. And maybe because of this misconception, I'm going to take the wrong turn. And then to illustrate again this point and to help you understand why the digital nomadic life helps us to see this kind of thing more often and to question ourselves, let me tell you something else that happens here. Every time when we are in the streets, we feel very, very safe here. In fact, everybody feels very safe here because criminality here is really, really low. It's almost inexistent, to be honest. I mean, people are not afraid at all of being robbed, being mugged, anything. People are just feeling safe all of the time. And that to me is interesting because I'm coming from Brazil, and in Brazil, criminality is quite high. But one of the things that we used to think when we lived in Brazil is that, well, one of the reasons why criminality here is very high is because the country is poor. And because the country is poor, the poverty has a big connection with criminality. Poverty is one of the great causes of criminality. That's why in Brazil we have a lot of criminality. But there is a problem with this thinking. Compared to Brazil, Albania is really, really a lot poorer than Brazil. Albania is a very, very poor country compared to Brazil. Brazil is incredibly rich compared to Albania. So if the problem is poverty, if poverty is what causes crime, then crime here should be much higher than in Brazil, because Brazil is much richer than Albania. If you don't believe that, maybe you don't know Brazil, so you don't know how much richer it is. Think about the US. It turns out that here we have lots of friends who are foreigners. Many of them are from the US. And then we ask them, why are you here? Why did you move to live here? They say, well, one of the main reasons is because the criminality in the US was just unbearable. The level of violence was just incredible. So we didn't want to face this anymore, so we moved here. And I'm like, what? So in the US, you're telling me that the criminality is so high that you don't want to be there and you come to Albania? Well, that's a surprise. Isn't that strange? Because, I mean, maybe you don't know that Brazil is much richer than Albania. But the US, I can tell you for sure, is way richer. In fact, it's the richest country in the world. How is it that people come from the US to Albania? Because of criminality. And then they come here and they find that there's no criminality here. Well, that's strange. What about my theory that poverty is what caused criminality? Oh, maybe this theory is wrong. Yeah, that's the thing. So now, because we are here and because we see the reality of this place, we see that maybe we have some misconception about the topic of criminality. And my point here is not to tell you what causes or doesn't cause criminality. Quite honestly, I don't know. I can't really answer that. What I can tell for sure is that the answer is not so simple like, oh, it's poverty that causes criminality. There's something more, probably a lot more, that I can't explain, but I can just say that I really don't know enough to give a proper answer. My point is that when you are living as a digital nomad, when you go to new places, you face situations like this so often that you soon realize that many of the things that you thought you knew are just plain wrong. In fact, one of the first things that we learned as digital nomads is that there is a massive difference between the world that we see on the TV, on the news, and the real world. The real world, fortunately, is way better than what we see on the news. On the news, it's always terrible, but when you go and visit the places, most of the time it's really great. It's not terrible at all. So there is a massive mismatch between what is said about a place and what actually happens in a place. And it's very useful for us to see the world as it really is and not as we think it is, because of so many misconceptions that have been planted in our minds by all kinds of ways. And this is one of the most useful aspects of the digital nomadic life. We get to see the world as it really is, and we get to question our conceptions very, very often. And this helps us eventually to make better decisions, because very often when we have to make a decision, we don't really assume, oh, I already know. Very often now we step back and think, oh, maybe we don't know enough. Maybe we should research a little bit more. And now we come back to the part where, in your case, even if you are not a digital nomad, you can do something about those misconceptions that we all have. So, how can you make better decisions and avoid all the misconceptions that all of us have? Nowadays, fortunately, we have the help of AI. So with those AI systems, we can now have like a person with us every single day, every time of the day, a person that we can ask things to this person and we can get to know how things really are. So if we accept that we don't know as much as we imagine, before making decisions, especially before making big decisions, we can just stop and ask this AI tool, explain what's going on, and ask for help. And if we get into the habit of doing that, we will soon find that we can learn incredible things very, very fast, and we can save ourselves from lots of problems just because now we have the proper answer. We know how things really work. So of course, it's great if you can go around like ourselves and see for yourself how things actually work in different places. But even if you don't do this, now you have a tool that can tell you how things really are. Those tools are amazing, but we have to use them. So if you're not still using them to help you to make better decisions and to especially question your conceptions and check if you have some misconceptions around the topics that you are trying to decide over, now you can probably improve a lot the quality of your decisions, and by doing that, you can improve a lot the quality of your life.